Welcome into Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, the Philadelphia Phillies have a new Baseball Hall of Fame member. Or do they? It's time for Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I am your host, Connor Thomas. Been talking Phillies baseball for years over on 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio, NBC Sports Philadelphia on the television. Sorry, no episode yesterday. 16-hour day yesterday at the station and doing TV. So I was on TV the past couple days, so appreciate you bearing with me. I'm happy to be here with you as your host of Locked On Phillies. I want to thank you for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Odyssey app, all that good stuff. It's your team every day, so check out Locked On Phillies every single day. Appreciate it. Do want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Now, yesterday, some really big baseball news for every team came out. The Baseball Writers of America, they decided on, or I guess it's the Baseball Writers Association of America, they placed their votes, or rather tallied their votes for this year's Hall of Fame class. Who's going to Cooperstown? Well, some years there's no guarantee that anybody's going. We already know that Fred McGriff is going because of the contemporary committee vote that this year was the first time that they had that. But there is one more man who will be joining McGriff during this year's enshrinement ceremony as he gets put into the Hall of Fame. Scott Rolen. Scott Rolen, huh? A very interesting player in Philadelphia Phillies history. And a more interesting one in Arizona Cardinals. Sorry, I'm in football mode. In St. Louis Cardinals history. And a bit of a fringe guy in Cincinnati Reds history. But here's basically what we've got as far as the votes. I'm going to run down the vote getters and the percentages for everybody so that we keep track of who got what. And we're going to discuss a little bit further some of the other guys who didn't quite make it in, because only one guy in this year. Well, not counting McGriff, of course, but he wasn't voted in the typical way. But Scott Rolen, the only one voted in by the contemporary way of doing this. Here are the vote tally results. So Scott Rolen was the only one to clear that 75% of the vote threshold. He got 76.3%, 297 total votes. Todd Helton, longtime Rocky, 72.2%. He's going to get in one day. He didn't get in this year, but he's going to get in. Billy Wagner, D3 legend, one of my idols, 68.1% of the vote. He'll be in one day. Andrew Jones, surprising to me that he only got 58.1% of the vote. Probably will get in one day. Obviously not this time. Gary Sheffield, 55%. Carlos Beltran, 46.5%. Jeff Kent, 46.5%. His final year on the ballot, he does not make the Hall of Fame. Jeff Kent is removed from the ballot. Alex Rodriguez, 35.7%. Manny Ramirez, 33.2%. Got the performance-enhancing drugs group there of guys that are not really getting votes from the writers. We know how they feel about that. Omar Vizquel, 19.5%. Andy Pettit, 17%. We got a couple Phillies back-to-back here. Bobby Abreu, 15.4%. Not looking good for his chances to get in at any point. Jimmy Rollins, 12.9%. Disappointed with the amount of votes gotten, or the percentage of votes gotten by Jimmy Rollins. Only 50 votes for Jimmy. Mark Burley had 10.8%. Francisco Rodriguez, 10.8%. And Torrey Hunter, 6.9%. So you look at a situation where there are only a handful of guys really close. Short of Helton, Wagner, and Andrew Jones, I don't know that anyone else who's on the ballot right now is going to make it in. Now, guys who are lower, like Jimmy Rollins, who was first time on the ballot, they can get these whole campaigns run for them where a lot of people just start, like the writers who voted for Scott Rolen, who were like, oh, well, Scott Rolen's incredible, third baseman, a lot of gold gloves, all this history. Great offensive player, great defensive player. He deserves to be in. Then next year they'll say, okay, well, we put Scott Rolen in. Jimmy Rollins' career looks more comparable to Scott Rolen. So there's ways that these guys could build up percentages, but As of yesterday's vote, Rolen the only one in, and Helton, Wagner, and Jones the only one, in my opinion, that are really making up ground and looking like they're getting close to getting it. Now, here's my question, and this is what I opened with when I said, well, the Phillies have a new Hall of Famer, or do they? I wrote an article about this for 975thefanatic.com this morning. Do you consider Scott Rolen a Philadelphia Philly? I know he played here. I know he won Rookie of the Year here. I know he won multiple Gold Gloves here. I know he was an All-Star here. I know he was a cornerstone of those early 2000s, well, I guess the late 90s teams. And then part of the first 2 years of the 2000s. How do you view Scott Rolen? Because to me, my gut instinct, when you ask me, is Scott Rolen, does he count as a Philadelphia Philly in the Hall of Fame? I say no. I know in the graphic that was put up for him by MLB on their Twitter feed, it has him in a Phillies uniform and then below him in a Cardinals uniform. I'll always consider him a Cardinal. There's a couple of things to factor in. First of all, I think the right way, the right rule of thumb, there's exceptions to every rule of thumb, but the rule of thumb is the more successful stretch for a team is the team that I consider you a Hall of Famer for. So he was more successful with the St. Louis Cardinals. That was where the bulk of his career success came in. I consider him a Cardinal. Listen, I just do. I know John Middleton's already stated that the Phillies are going to have a day to honor Scott Rolen going in the Hall of Fame. There's a very real chance that Rhys Hoskins is going to have to change his jersey number because 17 could be retired. Every other Philadelphia Philly that has made the Hall of Fame has had their jersey number retired by the Philadelphia Phillies. Scott Rolen's not even on the Phillies Wall of Fame. So going to be an interesting year to see how the Phillies honor Scott Rolen. Rhys Hoskins factors in, obviously, because he currently wears 17, but he had better numbers with the Cardinals, compiled more stats with the Cardinals. The bulk of his successful career was with the St. Louis Cardinals. And that normally means that that guy goes in my opinion, as a Cardinal. And I'm not saying what cap they choose to have on. I'm sure he's going to pick St. Louis. I'm just saying what we consider them as. Can we claim Scott Rolen and say the Phillies have a new Hall of Famer? I don't think we can. And there are rare circumstances where players split time between two teams, but it's very rare that you find like a very even split. The most recent example, I think, is Mike Mussina, who spent like half of his career with New York and half of his career with the Orioles. Obviously, the Orioles first was really good with both. Had better accolades, I guess, with Baltimore, but I always remember him as more of a New York Yankee because also that was the time I was growing up. He was on the Yankees. He was with the Orioles when I was real young, but still a very even split. So you could go either way on that one. But most guys, it's one way or another, there's an easy pick. The other thing that factors in, though, is the emotion that a city views you with. Like for me, Roy Halladay, I will always consider him a Philly. When I see him in the Hall of Fame, and I know he doesn't have a team on his cap because he didn't want to choose, got inducted posthumously after passing away in that unfortunate, terrible plane crash. But his wife made the decision he doesn't want to go in as like with either team's logo on his cap on the plaque he gets. But I always view him as a Philly. And I think part of that is because, he's my favorite player of all time. We loved him here in Philadelphia. He was awesome. And even though he spent so much time in Toronto and only 4 years here in Philly, I think he spent like three times as many years in Toronto. We loved him. We loved him in Philadelphia. And for that reason, I think a lot of people will always consider him a Philly, even though rightfully he should probably be a Blue Jay. Scott Rolen, we didn't love him here in Philly because in the 2002 season, he forced his way out because he didn't like the organization and the fans were coming out and he didn't want to be here anymore. And he forced his way to St. Louis. He didn't play on Scott Rolen Day. There's so much stuff with the way he exited the city and the way the city feels about Scott Rolen. He kind of shunned us and we shunned him. So even though he has more claim probably than Roy Halladay as a Philly in the Hall of Fame, Halladay will always feel like more of that guy to me because of the emotion. So it's weird. There's a lot of weird factors that go in, and it's an individual thing. Someone could be saying, hey, I love Scott Rolen growing up when he was with the Phillies. He left and I was sad, but man, he'll always be a Philly to me, or at least jointly with the Cardinals. It's an individual thing. So let me know how you feel about Scott Rolen and if you think the Philadelphia Phillies can claim him as a new Hall of Famer for their organization. But for me, I'm sorry. I just can't do it. Two other guys, though, lower down on the ballot, in Bobby Abreu and Jimmy Rollins. Well, they're certainly Phillies. And coming up, we're going to discuss a little bit deeper the chances that they might have to get in one day. Coming back, and we'll talk about that next segment, Locked On Phillies. First, let me tell you about FanDuel, though. I love FanDuel so much. I love their same-game parlays. I love their easy-to-use app. Listen, I've been using FanDuel long before I've been getting paid to talk about FanDuel, all right? I love them. They're my sportsbook of choice. And, of course, they're our sportsbook of choice here at Locked On. The NFL playoffs are here. We're really excited about FanDuel being our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the number one sportsbook in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. They're awesome new customers. You can join today. You get started with $150 in free bets. Place them however you want when you place your first $5 bet. So you place a $5 bet, you got $150 in free. It's free money. You can use it to win an easy bet. Hey, Eagles, money line. Go ahead and get them. Go get the Birds money line. It's great. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. It's great. Again, let me tell you, go make some money. Brock Purdy's not beating Philadelphia. Go put your money on the Eagles. Use those free bets, get that money back. So football fans, don't miss out. It's a safe, secure app, easy to use. I already told you, place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and now of Locked On Podcasts. Okay, let's talk about them. Jimmy and Bobby. Bobby and Jimmy. Two Philadelphia Phillies legends that, one Philadelphia Phillies legend and one guy that we very much underrate in this town looking back on his career, and Bobby Abreu. Two guys that did not get into the Hall of Fame and are not very close to that 75% threshold. Bobby Abreu, been on the ballot for a little bit, 15.4%, 10 more votes than Jimmy Rollins, who in his first year on the ballot got 12.9% of the vote. Will either of these guys ever be a Hall of Famer? Now I look at it. And I look at the guys ahead of them because part of it is stealing votes. You think about a political election. Do you know why there's only one Republican candidate and one Democrat candidate? Because if there were two Democrats, and it's happened back in history before we had like the set system that we have now, there's two Democrats. Half the Democrats are going to vote for one guy, and half the Democrats are going to vote for the other guy. And then people are going 100% of the Republicans are going to vote for the Republican candidate, and both Democrats are going to lose. I know that's not a perfect example, and I'm not getting into politics. I'm just saying you could split the vote. So, like, if there's two really good shortstops, and a baseball writer says, I like this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, and then, there's two shortstops left. Who has the better career? They're going to vote for one over the other. They can't, in some cases, they can't pick both, or they won't pick both for whatever dumb reason. And sorry, Baseball Writers Association of America. There's a lot of dumb people that get a chance to vote for the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. That's a different argument for a different day. Anyway, so when you look at players that get in, if a player Jimmy Rollins' position gets in, it could free up space. If another outfielder gets in, it could free up voting space for a Bobby Abreu. So that could change. That's part of the reason why vote percentages go up normally the longer you're on a ballot, or down for some players if it becomes more and more clear by players getting in that they're less deserving. But I think Rollins is on the way up. Unfortunately, I think Abreu is going to continue on the way down. And let's look at it. Look at some of the outfielders out there. Andrew Jones, 58.1% of the vote. That dude should be a lock Hall of Famer. His numbers are ridiculous compared to Bobby Abreu. If Andrew Jones is having trouble getting in, Bobby Abreu probably never will. Gary Sheffield, another guy. Now, questions about certain stuff with Gary Sheffield. Listen, he's a guy that got a better resume than Bobby Abreu, in my opinion. 55% of the vote. Carlos Beltran, he's going to have to get in. The only reason that he's not currently in is because of that cheating scandal with the Astros that he was a part of, that baseball writers are still holding against him. Listen, doesn't change the fact he was an incredible center fielder. He's got 46.5% of the vote this time around. I believe Beltran will probably end up in the Hall of Fame. These guys all have to make it. Ramirez, they all have to make it in before Bobby Abreu can make it in to the Hall of Fame. Not technically, but like that's how this stuff works. Abreu's not going to make it. Now, when you look at Jimmy Rollins, the only guy above him that I'm really looking at that could make a push and probably won't is Alex Rodriguez, that plays the same position. And I know Rodriguez moved to third in New York, but he was a shortstop originally, and some consider him the greatest shortstop of all time, even though he ceded that position to Jeter when he went to New York. Rodriguez has to go ahead and get in. But outside of that, Scott Rolen getting in actually helps Jimmy Rollins because it's another infielder, a guy with similar-ish numbers. Scott Rolen doesn't have the strongest Hall of Fame case. And the weaker players that get in, the easier it is for a player with Jimmy Rollins' resume to end up getting in. And Rollins he doesn't have like the total stat compilation in like the home runs and everything. And he has an MVP to his name, but he wasn't like consistently in the MVP conversation. The weird thing with Rollins is at his position, at the shortstop position, which is not really a strong offensive position, he's got one of the best offensive resumes of all time. The only guys ahead of him in like doubles and triples, I think, are guys already in the Hall. Rollins has really good numbers compared to his position. He doesn't have outstanding numbers compared to the rest of the Hall of Fame, or like your average Hall of Famer that deserves to get in, no doubt. So he's an interesting case study, but he's a guy that I do believe has an outside shot with the right campaign. So I think Bobby Abreu, unfortunately, is on the way out, and I think Jimmy Rollins will need some help. So maybe what we have to do next year when we get around the voting time, when we start seeing the ballots get tweeted out and know when media members are getting those ballots, we'll have to run a Jimmy Rollins for the Hall of Fame campaign here. I think I'm going to do that next year, next offseason, as we get ready for the Hall of Fame vote. We're going to have some special segments about Jimmy Rollins. Maybe I'll end every episode by saying, and don't forget, advocate for Jimmy Rollins for the Hall of Fame, just like how Bob Barker always used to end the Price is Right by saying, spay and neuter your pets, control the pet population. I'm going to say, hey, don't forget Jimmy Rollins, resume of a Hall of Famer, put him in. We'll find something to do. It's a long way off, but I think Jimmy's heading in the right direction. That'd be great. And I think he's probably going to be the only Philadelphia Philly from that era to make it in. Chase Utley, you'll have a case. Ryan Howard doesn't really, because even though his peak was incredible, the sustainability wasn't there. He didn't have a long enough career. He had the best peak out of any of those guys, out of the trio, the Rollins, Howard, Utley trio. Howard was the best player at his peak. The peak just didn't last long enough. So, unfortunately, he doesn't really have a case to get in. But Utley will make a run at it. He might get in. Rollins should make a extended run at it on the ballot. Like, I don't think he's getting kicked off the ballot anytime soon. But, yeah, we got to start the campaign. Got to try and get our guys in. So, hey, that's our Hall of Fame conversation. An interesting vote. A guy who wore a Phillies uniform for more than half a decade is going into the Hall of Fame. But again, I already told you I don't really consider Scott Rolen as a Phillies Hall of Famer, but maybe I'm wrong in that. We'll see. Bottom line is you got a guy going in that you watch play here in Philadelphia. That's always cool. And hopefully in a couple years we could say the same about Jimmy. We could maybe say the same about Bobby Abreu, even though I don't think that's realistic. Maybe Chase Utley. It's interesting. I've got a very interesting conversation that we're going to have tomorrow on Locked On Phillies on Hall of Famers. And I think it's something that's it's going to be really, really fun to get into, and a really fun debate to get into about Hall of Famers currently playing in the city. But coming up next, I want to talk about some current Philadelphia Phillies as we wrap up and just run through the list of non-roster spring training invitees that came out earlier this week. Talk about some guys to watch in Phillies spring training. We'll discuss as we wrap up Locked On Phillies. Okay, here's the list of the non-roster invitees. 21 players received invites to spring training that are not currently on the 40-man roster. So here are the players that the Philadelphia Phillies are inviting. Mick Abel, Mark Appel. These are, by the way, alphabetical by last name, just so you know how they're set up. And these are the right-handed pitchers. So right-handed pitcher Mick Abel, Mark Appel, who we saw last year. Mick Abel, of course, we know the young prospect. Andrew Baker, minor league arm. John Duplantier, Lewis Head, great name. Jake Jewell, Griff McGarry, who could be a guy that we see at the major league level this year. Francisco Morales, McKinley Moore, Andrew Painter. We knew he was going to be there already. Billy Sullivan and Jeremy Walker are your right-handed pitchers. Left-handed pitcher Ben Bowden. Infield, Jim Haley. Scott Kingery will be at Major League Spring Training. The Mail Machine, Will Toffey. Why did I say Toffey? Will Toffey. And Weston Wilson, which another great name there, are the infielders. And then catchers, Vito Friskia, John Hicks, and Max McDowell. Of course, the Phillies already set a catcher. Give you an idea of where the Philadelphia Phillies are outfielder-wise. No outfielders received a non-roster invite to spring training. That's the biggest takeaway that I see there. They need to go sign an outfielder. They need to go get somebody in free agency, trade for somebody. That's the one missing piece, like a depth outfielder, especially with Matt Vierling heading to Detroit in that trade for Gregory Soto. You got to go get an outfielder. But I'll give you my top guys I'm most excited about seeing in spring training. Mick Abel, Mark Appel, who I think could be some help out of the bullpen this year if he does make the Major League roster. I don't think he will, but at some point I think we'll see him again at the Major League level. Griff McGarry and Andrew Painter are the right-handed pitchers I'm looking at. Ben Bowden, not really. Scott Kingery is my most interesting of the position players, for sure. I mean, Dave Dombrowski mentioned that Scott Kingery could earn a spot on this roster with Nick Maton, one of your backup infielders, going to Detroit in that same trade for Gregory Soto, and Cody Clemens, who came back, who's a utility infielder, not being all that proven at the Major League level. Not that Scott Kingery is, but he has more experience. Kingery might have an outside shot of being on this roster. I don't know what he is anymore. He didn't have great numbers in AAA last year, but I don't know, man. They threw him all that money for a reason. He had some talent at some point, so maybe Scott Kingery makes his way in the mix and he ends up making this roster. But those are the names for guys outside of the regular roster that you know is already going to be at spring training that will be in attendance down there in Clearwater this spring. Get everything all set up. And again, reminder, something Dave Dombrowski said, everybody healthy for the Philadelphia Phillies outside of Bryce Harper, who's going to be heading into spring training. So a good sign there. Some interesting young names. All three of your young pitchers, that triple-headed monster. No, that three-headed monster was what I wanted to say, of Painter, Abel, McGarry, that we've been talking about for a year or years now, potentially coming up or progressing through the minors. They'll all be in Major League camp, so that's something that'll be very interesting to watch as well. So, hey, prospects, veterans, stars, everything at Phillies spring training is going to be awesome. Can't wait. It's right around the corner. Feels so close to baseball season, even though it's still cold and like ice rain outside. I can't wait for April. I mean, heck, get me to mid-February at this point so we can start talking spring training. That's all for today's Locked On Phillies. I want to thank you for making Locked On Phillies your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. That make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects. We're just talking prospects. You think I'm good at it? Lindsey Crosby is infinitely better, who hosts Locked On MLB Prospects. Go ahead and check out his work, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you, as always, for rating, reviewing, subscribing, all the comments I'm getting on Locked On Phillies, all of this great stuff. Appreciate the momentum we're building. Hopefully the content is worthy of the following. I think it is, but I'm a little bit biased. But I appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it takes 2 seconds. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Get notifications when new episodes get posted. Keep track of everything. You get the content first. It's so easy. So go ahead and do that for me. I really appreciate it. It significantly helps me out. Thank you for checking out Locked On Phillies. I will talk to you for our next episode tomorrow.